One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. The term mid-major really doesn't apply, in my opinion, in baseball like it does, say, in men's basketball or women's basketball. But we did see some brands, and you've already mentioned some. Old Dominion would be another potentially. We saw some brands who are not Power 5 or traditional power baseball programs get left out for a variety of reasons that you can drill down on if you'd like. But the reality is the last 4 teams in the field this year were Power 5 programs. What do you make of that as a marketplace development?
I think it's striking. I think it's striking that, for instance, the Big Ten, which was the number 7 RPI conference, winds up with 5 teams in the tournament. And Conference USA, which was the number 6 RPI conference, winds up with 2. And the American Athletic Conference, which was the number 4 conference, even ahead of the Pac-12, they wind up with 3. How does the 5th place team, or the 5th team, I should say, in the pecking order for the Big Ten, Maryland, how do they get in over UConn? When UConn, they're both in the 30s in the RPI. UConn was the 4th team in the number 4 conference. Maryland was, in the number 7 conference as the 5th team. UConn actually has considerably more top 100 wins. There's 17 of them compared to 10 for Maryland. And Maryland finished poorly. They lost their last 4 weekends. How does that happen? I cannot justify that. And same with Old Dominion, the 2nd place team in Conference USA in the regular season. RPI is about 50, so I guess that's the fig leaf. They didn't have good enough RPI, but they had a lot more quality wins. The 8 and 7 top 50, 18 and 13 top 100, compared with Maryland 10 and 11. It's a big difference for me. And again, they're in a better league and they finished 2nd place. I just, they won good series. They won a road series against Southern Miss. They won a series against West Virginia. Those are good RPI series. So they did enough to me to get in, and I don't understand why they didn't. Whether it's because they just don't have the cachet of the Big Ten and the SEC, I don't know. Whether it's because their AD is on the committee. You can connect the dots. I don't know, but I find it hard to defend. And I say that as someone who really likes Maryland's team. I saw them in the fall. I saw them a couple times in the spring. They have talent. I think they can be dangerous in a regional, but I don't think they played their way in. In fact, quite the opposite. I think they played their way out with the way that they finished. So I'd rather reward a team that finishes strong and plays its way in.
So you've pointed to the RPI a couple of times on how it can be potentially a little misleading versus the product and the abilities of the team on the field. And you've alluded to this a little bit, but let's go deeper. Are there changes to how you believe the RPI is calculated that would be helpful to better balance competitive forces within college baseball right now?
I think the main thing is just what I said earlier. I think that if you give every team a little bit of a grace period at the back of their schedule, if you play 4 games against somebody who's just terrible, it shouldn't crush you, because if your other 14 weeks are really good, why should you have a 15-spot drop on your RPI because you beat up on somebody who stinks one weekend? It has a disproportionate effect. When you look at Louisiana Lafayette's body of work, for instance, they got a lot of really nice wins at the high end, but there's some wins at the low end, just kill them, and I think that's wrong. Other than that, I like the way that they changed the formula to reward some of the colder weather teams, by weighting the road games more. And I think that's fair, because if you're in the north and you have to start the season on the road for the first 6 weeks of the year, it's a lot harder to win on the road. The statistics bear that out. And I think it was a really good way to level the playing field. And that's why a team like St. John's winds up getting in the field this year, because their RPI is up there. They won a lot of games, first of all. They won 42 games. But, they also had to go on the road because they're a northern team, and so they had an RPI in the 30s. And so they were able to get in despite that weaker strength of schedule. So, and I'm okay with that. I think northern teams should be given some leeway, and I understand it's harder to schedule up there, so I wouldn't punish St. John's for only going 1-0 against the top 50. But I just think the way that the RPI is used, I think they've done a pretty good job generally in recent years of recognizing that different parts of the country face different challenges when it comes to the RPI, and so that's why you see teams in the West tend to get in with lower RPIs. You'll see a bubble team in the 50s or even number 60 or so with Oregon a few years ago get in the West. But usually if you're outside the top 50 in the Southeast, it's a lot harder.
Sure. What about the seeding maybe of the 8 national seeds or those beyond in the top 16? The one topic that's pretty hot here locally for me is, of course, the potential Kentucky-Louisville super regional matchup, which will get people in this marketplace, super excited for the next 2 weeks if they're both to advance. But did you feel like the seeding and the potential super regional matchups were fair given how you guys saw how these teams fell?
Yeah, I think that part they got right. We thought they had the right teams as the 8 national seeds. I mean, you could have certainly made a case for Kentucky or Southern Miss or maybe even Arkansas. But ultimately, I think Stanford deserved that last spot, and the other 7 teams were pretty much locked in, I think. And actually, the way that they paired up the super regionals is the same way that we did it in our final projection. So I think they did that part right. Overall, I'm not trying to crush this committee. I think they did okay considering it was a difficult year to put together the field. It really was because the bubble was smaller than usual. You had 6 of those unexpected winners in conference tournaments that stole bids, by bumping another team to an at-large. So usually it's about 2 or 3 on average. So it was a smaller bubble, and it was harder to do it. That said, there were some things they screwed up, and I give them a B minus because there was at least the teams that they put in at the back to me weren't egregious. I mean, when we were doing our exercise, we wound up with 6 teams for 3 spots at the end, and we concluded that any one of those 6 teams were worthy, and I wouldn't have had a problem with it. And ultimately, what they did was they just took the 3 that we didn't take. And so I think they made the wrong choices, and I argued for that. I argued for the 3 that we took instead of the 3 that they took. But ultimately, the 3 that they took weren't egregious. The only egregious thing that they did was giving Clemson a host over Virginia. I just thought, a team that loses 11 of its last 12 ACC games and finishes 1 game behind Virginia in the standings and loses head-to-head in the conference tournament when both teams know that they're playing for a home regional. That's on the line. That was a big game, and Virginia pounded them. Talking about playing your way out. Why would you reward a team for that? And I know their schedule was strong at the end of the year. It was challenging, but even so, I think the way you finish has to matter a little bit, considering in the past it's something that they have held up as being important.
You and Kendall and a couple others on that team, Kyle certainly, you guys cover college baseball truly better than anybody else in the nation. Is there ever going to be a day, or do you foresee a day when we have a baseball NIT?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, because I know there are coaches that have tried to push for an expansion of the tournament. If you look at the ratio of teams that get into the postseason compared with total number of teams out there, I think baseball is the lowest. You got 299 Division I teams and only 64 make it. Basketball has expanded its tournament. Football, everybody gets to a bowl. But in baseball, it's only 64 out of 300, and that's a low percentage. And I know that there are some teams out there that would love to keep playing, even if it was an NIT kind of tournament. I just don't know that the sport can support that right now. I guess if you do it like they do in basketball, where you've got the on-campus sites and you're not putting that much of a strain on these programs, maybe it would work. But it's an interesting idea. It's just something I haven't heard talked about very much.
And that's today's One Question, brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. One Question is designed to give D1 Ticker subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences. One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.